Cincinnati office of the IRS is looking at 501c3 applications that included the word Patriot or Tea Party. Rand Paul, who we spoke of before, who we confirmed yesterday, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, running for president because he's been to, in May, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, the first 3 states that hold primaries, and most importantly, he's been to Israel.
That's the magic constellation.
Because that's who he needs to court. There's the idea that he's a libertarian and conservatives won't come over. So Rand Paul, running for president, he made the Christian Broadcasting Network video, A Day with Rand Paul, or An Evening with Rand Paul, right? So he's courting religious conservatives, and the way you court religious conservatives in America, inexplicably, is you go talk to the Jews in Israel.
It is ironic, but apparently effective.
So Rand Paul sees an opportunity here to bring together his government-hating group because everybody hates the IRS. So he doesn't even believe that Obama's outraged. Clip 4.
I'm afraid he's going to do about as much as he did after Benghazi. The people who made the decisions not to provide security were transferred temporarily, and they still work for the State Department. No one was fired. So it's a bit of faux outrage, and I wonder, what is the president going to do? So we are going to demand tomorrow in a Senate resolution that says to the president, Mr. President, if someone did this for political reasons, targeted groups, they should be fired.
Yeah. Well, and they will be. Here's more of Rand Paul, clip 5.
You know, when I think of this thing, I think of what Lincoln said. He says, you know, nearly any man can be tested and maybe meet up to adversity, but if you really want to test a man, give him power. I think in that sense, the president's failing that test of power because he has extraordinary power and he's supposed to be able to be wise enough to restrain himself. But he's using the power of government to investigate his enemies. He's tapping the phones of the press. And it turns out last year he signed legislation that allows him to detain an American without a trial and send them to Guantanamo Bay. This sounds like a president somewhat drunk on power, not cautious about how he's
So we got the IRS scandal, we've got the phone tapping scandal that we're getting into tonight, and then, of course, Benghazi.
Yeah, I hate it when that moment comes where you agree with Rand Paul.
I was just going to say, that's just chilling.
Yeah, it's a blow when you agree with Rand Paul. So let's talk about the IRS scandal for a minute. David Sirota wrote a piece in Salon that's just great, and so we're going to essentially just steal it, and I want to give David all the credit in the world for writing this piece, because we got this sense of outrage, and David points out in that Salon piece, where was the outrage? If the Republicans were really upset about this, where was their outrage during the Bush administration when he used the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, and the Secret Service to go after his political opponents? And there was no outrage, as David Sirota points out, not even enough outrage from Democrats. So the IRS was not only part of George W. Bush's using federal resources against political opponents, the IRS was only part of that. 2005, the IRS conducts a 2-year investigation into a Pasadena church after the pastor spoke out about the Iraq War. An IRS audit. The LA Times talked about the church, calling it one of Southern California's largest and most liberal congregations. That's from the LA Times. They had an audit. They were eventually cleared, of course, in the audit, but the IRS does it because there's this church that is incredibly critical of the Iraq War in 2005. They had been critical prior. That was almost seemed punitive because he'd already won the election.
Right.
That one seemed like, hey, everybody, if you're going to challenge us, this incredibly sort of popular pastor and this significant church, if you challenge us on the Iraq War, which, by the way, I mean, everyone's against the Iraq War now.
Right. It was the most righteous and informed opinion,
right. And
as history shows.
So that church having that opinion in 2003, 2004, standing alone with people who literally changed the dialogue in this country. And I give Cenk and myself, we were both doing the Young Turks at that time, some credit for being against the war then. But mostly who changed the nature of the conversation in this country were attempts by Phil Donahue, but of course MSNBC fired him quickly for being against the war. But ultimately,
by the way, I was against it too, but I was just arguing with my dad in the car, so it was not quite.
Did your dad come around?
No, he didn't. But now he, of course,
right, of course.
I was wrong.
Keith Olbermann and the Huffington Post really sort of led the conversation again. But it was people like this in this church in Pasadena, and they hammer him with the audit. Also, not just that, Bush used the Secret Service to block anti-war protesters on a consistent basis. The San Francisco Chronicle pointed out that they targeted peaceful anti-war activists as well, sometimes for just holding up small handmade signs outside the designated protest zone. That's another thing that we get to, the designated protest zone that's now just, oh yeah, we just have that in this country. You can't protest anywhere. You get a little area where you're allowed to protest.
That's become something that on Obama's watch has grown and has become even more onerous. The notion is onerous.
Yep.
But it's become even worse under Obama's administration. That's what so he stands there, and I mean him metaphorically, but I also mean him specifically, with his arms crossed, while all of these civil rights, things we're used to in this country, have slowly been given up.
Another thing that he did after 9/11 that we learned, that the FBI, so we had the Secret Service, we had the IRS, here's the FBI, that the FBI improperly investigated left-leaning advocacy groups. Citing cases where agents put activists on terrorist watch lists, even though they were planning nonviolent civil disobedience. It's a story we did back then and that we were sort of outraged by at the time.
I mean, that gets right to it. I mean, that puts him right in the crosshairs. That certainly meets every standard that this IRS thing could possibly meet, although it clearly exceeds them as well.
So we had the CIA, we have the FBI, we have the Secret Service, and then the IRS also with the famous case in 2004 investigating the NAACP, because the NAACP had been against Bush and against the war in Iraq. So all four of these cases incredibly sort of well thought out and explained by David Sirota. It's sort of there's a Fox News headline then that came about that was ironic during this during the IRS scandal. The Fox News headline blared, summarizing an interview with Karl Rove, as David points out, "What if the IRS under President Bush targeted liberal groups?" Yeah, well, they did target liberal groups. So, I mean, we know it happened, and they didn't just do it with the IRS, but again, I'm sorry to repeat it, with the CIA, with the FBI, and the Secret Service.